The house felt quieter than usual, the silence settling like dust on the furniture. I sat in the living room, the place that once held the energy of family laughter, conversation, the warmth of shared moments. Now, all I could hear was the hum of my own thoughts and the occasional creak of the floorboards, as if even the house itself was trying to tell me something. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you are listening in the comments. Lily, my daughter, had spread a vacation brochure on the coffee table earlier today. I had watched her and Ben, her husband, as they eagerly discussed their upcoming trip to Vancouver Island. The kind of trip I'd once dreamed of taking with Sarah. The kind of trip I had always assumed we would share as a family. Once the years had passed and the kids were grown. But now, sitting there, it was clear that I was not invited. Lily casually explained that the resort they were going to was perfect private beach access. 4 bedrooms. Ocean views. I tried to join in, tried to show enthusiasm. But before I could say a word, she had gently but firmly pushed the brochure away from me. "You're too old for such adventures," she said with a smile that felt more like an apology than an invitation. Her words hit harder than I expected. I had heard it before, but this time it stung in a way I couldn't quite shake off. Ben and his parents, Walter and Margaret, who were older than I was, were going. Yet somehow I was deemed unsuitable. It wasn't the first time I'd been left out of their plans, but it was the first time I truly understood the weight of it. To them, I had become invisible. I was no longer the father who had raised her, the man who had built a life for this family. I was just the old man in the corner, someone to be looked after rather than included. I wanted to protest, to remind her that I had been there for her when she needed me. But I said nothing. What could I say? Instead, I watched them continue planning, laughing about snorkeling excursions and sunset dinners as if I wasn't even there. They talked about everything without a glance in my direction, without a thought for how I might feel. And that was when it hit me something had changed. I wasn't part of their world anymore. I wasn't the father they leaned on, the person they turned to for advice. No, I was just the man who had a house that they would likely see as theirs once I was out of the picture. And that thought, more than any of the dismissive words they had said, hurt the most. But this time, I wouldn't just sit quietly. This time, I would show them that I was more than just the old man they had written off. It was time to take control of my life again. Time to make a change. As I sat there, staring at the quiet emptiness of the living room, a growing sense of disbelief settled over me. How had it come to this? How had my daughter, the one I had raised with love and care, to become so dismissive of me? I had spent my life providing for her, giving her every opportunity I could afford. And yet now, I was nothing more than an afterthought, a person to be sidelined, left behind. I watched them continue to chat about their trip, as if it was all already decided. My absence from their plans was assumed, an unspoken fact. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, not at Lily, not at Ben, but at myself. How had I allowed this to happen? How had I let them take my place in my own home, in my own life? A part of me wanted to yell out, to demand that they see me, that they acknowledge all that I had done for them. But another part of me, one that had learned over the years to keep calm, to be the provider, the peacemaker, remained silent. I stood up slowly, my knees creaking, the weight of my age pressing down on me with every movement. The house felt colder now, even though the furnace was running, even though the family was still there, planning their luxurious escape without me. I walked toward the kitchen, but my thoughts kept circling back to the same painful truth. I had been relegated to the role of a caretaker, a mere observer in my own home. I had been the one to give, to support, to make sure everyone was comfortable. But what did I have to show for it now? A family that was planning to sell my house behind my back, to put me away in a nursing home like an outdated piece of furniture. The conversation I had overheard the night before echoed in my mind, right after we returned from Hawaii. We put him in that nursing home. It's our inheritance anyway. The words were casual, but the impact they had on me was devastating. I was no longer a part of their future, just an obstacle to their plans. The very house that I had built with Sarah was now something they saw as theirs for the taking. I walked back to the living room, my heart heavy with the realization of what was happening. This wasn't just about a vacation or a house, it was about respect, and I had none left in their eyes. They thought they could control me, manipulate me, use me for their convenience. But what they didn't know was that they had underestimated me. They had forgotten one important thing I had spent my whole life planning, thinking ahead, calculating every move. And now, it was my turn to act. I turned toward the hallway, a quiet resolve building within me. It's time to make a change. I wasn't going to sit back any longer. I was going to take control of my own life, my own destiny, and I wasn't going to wait for them to decide when it was my time to go. No, it was time for me to make a move they would never expect. Tomorrow, everything would change. The decision had been made. As I sat in the quiet of the living room, the hum of the house around me felt different, now distant, almost alien. I had spent so many years caring for this place, making sure everything was just right. But now, I realized this house wasn't mine anymore. Not in the way I had believed. It had become just another asset, something for them to take when the time was right. But I wasn't going to let them steal it from me. Or worse, push me aside while they claimed it. That night, as the voices from the kitchen became muffled by the walls, I allowed myself to think, what if I took control? What if I could turn the tables on them? It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect, about making them see me again, as the man I was, not the burden they thought I had become. I wasn't going to quietly fade into the background. Forgotten and disregarded, I remembered the years I had spent building this life. The late nights spent working, the early mornings fixing things around the house. I had always planned for the future, both for myself and for my family. But somewhere along the way, that sense of responsibility had turned into an expectation from them. They had come to see me as a safety net, a fallback, but no more. I stood up from the chair, a new determination surging through me. I walked to the desk where I kept the important documents, deeds, tax records, insurance papers, the house, my house, the one I had poured so much of myself into, was still under my name. It was still mine, legally and, more importantly, in my heart. I took a deep breath and pulled out the deed to the house. I looked at it for a moment, the weight of what it represented settling in my chest. This wasn't just about a piece of property. It was about reclaiming my power. I hadn't been a passive observer all my life, waiting for others to decide my fate. No, I had built this life with my own hands, and I would be the one to decide what happened next. I dialed the number for the real estate agent I had worked with years ago, Zachary Allen. He had helped me buy this house all those years ago, and now I needed him again. "Mr. Parker," he answered, his voice as calm and professional as ever. "How can I help you today, Zachary?" I said, my voice steady. "I need to sell my house, and I need it done quickly. I'll accept a competitive price, but I need it sold in 2 weeks. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost hear him weighing my request. 2 weeks is aggressive, he replied. But if you're serious, I can make it happen. Let's get started. I hung up the phone, feeling the weight of my decision settle in. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. My family thought they were in control, that I was just a passive player in their plans. But they had no idea what I was capable of. I wasn't going to be their burden anymore. I was going to take my life back, starting with this house. They would learn, when they returned, that I had taken charge. They would learn that I was not someone to be overlooked, and certainly not someone to be taken for granted. The next few days passed in a blur, a strange mix of urgency and calm. I had made the call. The house was officially for sale. And though I knew it was the right thing to do, the weight of the decision lingered in the air like a storm waiting to break. Every time I walked through the hallways, I could almost feel the echoes of Sarah's laughter, of Lily running through these rooms as a child. But those memories, as precious as they were, no longer had the power to stop me. This house, and everything it represented, was no longer mine to hold on to. I didn't tell Lily, or Ben, or anyone in the family what I had done. I couldn't. The shock of their reaction would be too much to bear. They still thought they had control. They still believed they could plan my future without ever consulting me. But they were wrong. I wasn't their passive participant. I had made my choice, and I was going to see it through, no matter what. The agent, Zachary, moved quickly. He had taken the details of the house, the pictures, and the listings, and within a couple of days, I was receiving calls from potential buyers. I had priced it low, deliberately so, to ensure a fast sale. I didn't want to play games with them. I wanted it gone, and I wanted to be free from the weight of their expectations. In the meantime, I spent my days going through the house, clearing out old boxes, personal items, the remnants of a life that had been lived in this space. I could feel a sense of closure settling in with every step. It wasn't just the physical act of clearing out, it was the emotional weight I had carried for years of being the one who gave, who sacrificed, but never received. I had been so focused on keeping everyone else happy that I had lost sight of what made me happy, of what I wanted. As I packed up Lily's old childhood toys, Sarah's gardening tools, and the books we had read together in the evenings, I thought about their return. They would come back to a house that wasn't theirs anymore, to a reality they hadn't expected, and I couldn't wait to see their faces when they realized the inheritance they had planned on was now just a memory. But it wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life. I was no longer the person who had been taken for granted, the person who was always there for others, but never got anything in return. I was Christian, the man who had built something from the ground up, who had given all he had for the people he loved. But now, I was taking something back for myself. I sat on the porch that evening, looking out at the yard where Sarah had once planted flowers, where Lily had played with her friends. It felt different now, not sad, but peaceful. The weight of uncertainty had lifted, and I knew that no matter what happened next, I had made the right choice. Tomorrow, the first offer would come in, and by the time Lily and Ben returned from their vacation, everything would have changed. The day after I made the call to sell the house felt like a stranger's home. It had been my refuge, my sanctuary, for so many years. But now, it was nothing more than a property, something to be sold, something to be let go. I couldn't shake the sense that I was preparing to sever a part of myself, but at the same time, I knew I had to. I wasn't going to allow my family to control the narrative any longer, to decide my fate without consulting me, without considering what I wanted for once. Zachary, the real estate agent, was efficient. Within a day, he had secured an interested buyer, someone who had the financial means to make a quick purchase, which was exactly what I needed. The buyer was interested in a cash deal, and with minimal contingencies, it would be a fast closing. I felt a strange sense of relief as I signed the papers, the weight of the decision finally falling into place. This wasn't just about selling a house. This was about taking back control, about showing Lily, Ben, and the rest of my family that I was still in charge of my own life. The next few days felt like a waiting game. I could feel the shift happening, the subtle but powerful change in the air. The house was no longer mine. But I was no longer the man who had been quietly dismissed. I began to move through the motions of preparing for the closing, sorting through personal items, taking one last walk through the rooms that had held so many memories. It was a peaceful act of closure. I was no longer bound by the expectation that I would just be here, waiting for them to need me. The day of the closing arrived faster than I expected. Zachary arrived at the house with the buyer's attorney, and I signed the final paperwork without hesitation. I could feel the weight lifting with every signature, every transaction that made the sale official. The house, my home, the place where I had built a life with Sarah, was now officially gone. But something inside me had shifted, something stronger than the loss. I felt a sense of freedom that I hadn't known in years. When I handed over the keys to Zachary, I realized just how far I had come. The man who had once been seen as just a caretaker, just the one who provided without question, had taken control. And as I watched Zachary drive off with the paperwork and the keys, I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life. I had made the decision. I had taken the action. And now, I was free. As the afternoon light streamed through the empty windows, I sat down in the living room one last time. The silence wasn't oppressive anymore. It was peaceful, almost welcoming. Tomorrow, the buyers would take over. But today, I had taken the first real step toward living life on my own terms again. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was Lily. "Dad, we just landed," she said, her voice full of excitement. "Everything's great here, but we miss you. We'll call again soon." I smiled to myself as I looked around the now empty house. "You should. I'll be here," I replied softly. But I knew, deep down, that I wouldn't be here for long. The days following the sale were filled with a strange sense of anticipation. It wasn't just the thought of moving on from the house that preoccupied me. It was the realization that I had finally taken control of my life. For so long, I had been the one who gave, who supported, but had never truly been seen. Now, I was the one calling the shots. And there was something liberating about that. I spent my days in the small apartment I had rented nearby, organizing my things, adjusting to a life that was entirely my own. It felt foreign at first being alone, having no one rely on me, no one to cook for or clean up after. But soon enough, I found solace in the quiet. The apartment was modest, but it was mine. It felt like a fresh start, of a chance to build a new life on my own terms. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope as I sat by the window, looking out at the unfamiliar street. I reflected on everything that had led up to this moment. I thought about Lily and Ben, and how they had made their assumptions about me, about my future. They had planned everything without consulting me. thinking I was too old to understand, too old to act. But they had underestimated me. They thought I was a man who would simply sit back and accept what they decided for me. They couldn't have been more wrong. I glanced at the calendar. It was almost time for Lily and Ben to return from their vacation. I had been quietly biding my time, letting them enjoy their trip, all the while preparing for what would come next. I didn't know exactly what I expected from them when they returned, but I knew it wouldn't be what they thought. They expected me to be waiting for them, to be the dutiful father, who had no choice but to comply. What they didn't know was that I had already made my decision. I was done playing the role they had cast me in. I was done being the one who was taken for granted. As I moved through the days, preparing for their return, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. I wasn't just sitting idly by. I was rebuilding my life, brick by brick. I was showing them that I wasn't just the old man they thought they could dismiss. I was Christian, and I was in control. The phone rang again, breaking my thoughts. It was Lily, her voice upbeat and full of the excitement that had become so familiar to me. "Dad, we're heading back tomorrow. We can't wait to see you. We've had such a great time." He took a deep breath, suppressing a smile. "I'm glad to hear it," I said, my voice calm, measured. "I'm sure you'll have plenty to tell me when you get back." And I knew, as I said those words, that everything was about to change. The morning of Lily and Ben's return was unlike any other. The calm that had settled over me these past few days was replaced with a quiet anticipation. The apartment, though modest, I felt like the first real space I had carved out for myself in years. As I looked around at the bare walls, I realized that this was it. This was my chance to live life on my own terms, free from the expectations of others. I had already made peace with the decision to sell the house. I knew it was the right thing to do, but as the hours ticked by, leading up to their return, I felt a sense of justice building within me. This wasn't just about the house. It was about standing up for myself, about showing them that I was not the helpless old man they thought I had become. They had treated me like a burden for too long. And now, it was time for them to face the consequences of their actions. I had no illusions about what would happen when they arrived. They would be angry, confused, maybe even furious. But deep down, I knew that their anger would be a reflection of their own guilt, the realization that they had underestimated me and taken my kindness for granted. As I prepared to face them, I couldn't help but reflect on all the years I had spent giving, supporting, and sacrificing for them. The house, the food, the bills, all of it had been a part of the life I had built for my family. And yet, it had never felt like enough for them. They had always wanted more, without ever truly acknowledging the cost. Now, as I sat there, watching the clock, I realized that this was my moment. They would return to find everything they had taken for granted gone. The house, the plans for their inheritance, the comfortable life they thought was theirs for the taking. Everything would be different. I would no longer be the one to serve their needs, the one they could rely on without a second thought. The phone rang just before noon, cutting through the silence. It was Lily again, her voice as chipper as ever. "Dad, we're on our way. We'll be there soon. I hope you've been doing well. Can't wait to catch up." I smiled to myself. I could hear the excitement in her voice, the same excitement she had shown when she planned the vacation without me. "I'm doing just fine," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm sure you'll have plenty of stories to tell when you get here." I hung up and sat back, knowing that the calm was about to end. They were coming back, and with them, the reckoning they hadn't expected. As I waited for their return, I couldn't help but feel a sense of power that I had not felt in years. I wasn't their burden anymore. I had taken control, and now they would see the consequences of their actions. The time for my silence was over. The sound of the front door slamming open was the first sign that Lily and Ben had returned. It was followed by the hurried footsteps of Margaret and Walter, their voices already animated as they entered. I could hear the excitement in the air, the upbeat chatter about their trip, the stories, the sights, the places they'd been. But all of it felt hollow, like noise in the background of something much more important. I sat there, quietly watching them through the open doorway of my apartment. As they continued their cheerful chatter, they had no idea what was waiting for them. No idea that everything they had planned, everything they thought they had a right to, was about to crumble. Lily's voice carried from the kitchen. "I can't wait to show you all the pictures." "Dad, the resort was amazing. You would have loved it there," but I didn't respond. Not right away. I wanted them to feel the shift, to wonder where I was, why I hadn't immediately come to greet them like the doting father they had taken for granted. I could hear the shift in their voices when they realized I wasn't waiting at the door, that I wasn't sitting in my usual chair, ready to ask them about their trip. "Where's Dad?" Lily's voice was tentative now, uncertainty creeping in. I could hear her walking through the house, looking for me. I finally stood up from my seat and walked toward the living room. As I entered, I saw the confusion in their eyes. They stopped mid-sentence, frozen, as they took in the emptiness of the house. The photographs on the walls were gone. The shelves, once filled with family mementos, stood bare. The furniture that had sat in place for years was no longer there. Lily looked around, her face contorting with confusion. "What's going on?" "Dad." Her voice had lost its previous excitement and now held an edge of concern. "Why is everything gone?" I stood in the doorway, watching them struggle to comprehend what was happening. There was no anger in me now, just a quiet sense of satisfaction. They were finally seeing the consequences of their actions. "Where's the house?" Ben asked, his tone shifting from confusion to something colder. "What happened to everything?" "You sold it." I nodded slowly, watching their reactions unfold like a slow-motion film. Their disbelief, the panic creeping into their eyes, was exactly what I had hoped for. They hadn't expected this. They thought I would be the one left behind, the one they could quietly discard when the time was right. They had forgotten one very important thing. I wasn't powerless anymore. "I did sell it," I said calmly, walking toward the kitchen counter where a real estate folder sat. "Its contents now, official. The house is gone. But I'm fine. I'm moving on." Lily's face paled, and Ben looked as though he might argue, but words failed him. Margaret, who had been quiet until then, finally spoke, on their voice breaking. "David, you sold the house?" "Yes," I replied, my voice steady, "and I'm doing just fine. I've made plans for my own future now." The silence that followed was deafening. They didn't know what to say, and I didn't have anything left to prove. In the end, it wasn't just the house that had changed. It was everything. I had finally reclaimed my power, my voice, and my place in this world. They would have to figure out the consequences on their own. And as I turned away from them, I knew that this was the last time I would ever be ignored. The reckoning was complete. The silence that followed my words seemed to stretch on forever, each second heavier than the last. Lily stood frozen, her eyes wide with shock, while Ben's face twisted between disbelief and anger. Margaret and Walter, usually so composed, exchanged glances, filled with confusion. They had all thought they held the power, the control over me, the house, and the future. But now, they were faced with a reality they hadn't anticipated, and the weight of it was sinking in. Lily's voice was shaky when she spoke again. Dad, why didn't you tell us? Why sell the house? This was supposed to be ours. Yours, I repeated, the word hanging in the air like a question they couldn't answer. You thought it was yours. I took a step forward, my eyes fixed on each of them, one by one. You never once asked me what I wanted. You didn't care about me. Not really. You saw this house, this life I built, as something you could take, just because you thought it was your right. Well, I'm done with that. Lily opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Ben, still processing, finally found his voice. You can't just sell it. That was the plan. We were going to do what? I cut him off. My voice firm now. No trace of hesitation. To put me in a nursing home to make sure I was out of the way while you lived your lives. I shook my head. I don't need your charity. I didn't need it then. And I certainly don't need it now. Margaret stepped forward, her face pale and stricken with guilt. David, please. We didn't mean it like that. We just... No, I said, holding up my hand. No more excuses. I heard everything. The plans, the nursing home, the way you spoke about me, like I was a problem to be solved. My chest tightened as I spoke, the words coming out sharper than I had expected. But it felt good, so good to finally say them out loud. You don't get to make those decisions for me anymore. Not now. Not ever again. The truth was, I had been waiting for this moment, for the moment when I would stop being invisible. For too long, I had been the one who gave, who supported mice, without ever being asked what I needed. But today, I wasn't just the old man in the corner. I wasn't the one they could control anymore. Today, I had taken back my life. They didn't speak after that, and the tension in the room grew thicker. I could feel the weight of their regret, the guilt creeping in, and it made everything even clearer. They thought they could manipulate me, take from me, and I had let them for far too long. But now, they saw me for what I truly was, not a burden, not a pawn, but a man who had lived a full life and was still capable of making his own choices. I've already moved on, I said. My voice, calme now, but resolute. I sold the house. I've made new plans. And I looked at them one last time, each of them standing there, still processing the shock. You'll have to figure it out. I won't be the one to carry your weight anymore. I turned and walked toward the door, the sound of their stunned silence following me like a weight in the air. But it didn't matter anymore. They could no longer control me. They would learn what it meant to take someone for granted, and by the time they did, I would be long gone, living my life on my own terms, finally free. As I stepped outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the street. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The future was mine to shape, and no one would take that away from me again. As I stepped into my new apartment that evening, the weight of the day still hung heavily in the air. The confrontation with Lily is Ben, and the others had left me feeling drained. But there was something else too, a sense of clarity, of finally having taken control of my own life. I had done it. I had finally stood up for myself, for what I needed, for what I deserved. I sank into the small but comfortable chair by the window, looking out over the quiet street. It wasn't the grand house I had once shared with Sarah, but it was mine. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt enough. The house, My past life was now in the rearview mirror, and the future stretched out before me, empty but full of possibilities. As I looked around the apartment, I thought back on everything I had learned. I had spent years being the silent provider, the one who gave and gave without asking for anything in return. I had allowed myself to be taken for granted, to be seen as an obstacle, a burden. But in doing so, I had let them define me. I had let them control how I saw myself. And that was the mistake. The real turning point came when I stopped allowing their perceptions to dictate my reality. I realized I wasn't just the man they thought they could push aside. I wasn't weak. I wasn't powerless. And I certainly wasn't done. I was still capable of so much more than they'd ever imagined. The lesson I learned was simple, but powerful. You are not defined by the expectations others place on you. For so long, I had allowed my role in the family to be dictated by their needs, their plans. But that wasn't my role. I wasn't their caretaker or their punching bag. I was David Parker, a man who had worked hard his whole life, a man who had built a legacy, not just of things, but of character. And no one, not even my own family, had the right to take that away from me. The phone rang again, cutting through my thoughts. It was Lily. I picked up, not knowing what to expect. "Dad, we need to talk," she said, air voice tentative, now, laced with something I hadn't heard before, regret. We didn't mean to hurt you." I could hear the emotion in her voice. And for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But I knew I had made the right choice. "I know you didn't, Lily, but you did. And now, we all have to face the consequences of what's been said and done." "I understand," she said, air voice faltering. "I'm sorry. We never should have treated you like that." I sighed, leaning back in my chair, letting the words settle. "Lily, the important thing is that we learn from this. We can't go back and fix the past, but we can move forward with respect for each other, and for the lives we've built." "I will," she said, her tone more sincere now. "I promise." As I hung up the phone, a small but genuine sense of relief washed over me. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It wasn't about getting even. It was about healing, about finding a way to rebuild the relationships that had been damaged. And it started with understanding that I was worthy of respect, that I had the right to stand up for myself, to ask for what I needed, and to take control of my own future. The lesson, in the end, was this: you are never too old to reclaim your life. You are never too far gone to take back your dignity and your power. And no matter how much others try to define you, only you can decide who you are. And with that, I closed the door on the past and stepped into a future that was finally mine to shape. If you like this story, please like this video and subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.